Before the Blair Witch Project, we had Snuff, a 1976 grindhouse horror that convinced audiences its final scene was real. The brutal and sexualised on-screen murder of a young female production assistant was marketed as the bloodiest thing to happen in front of a camera, and we bought it. Snuff wasn't real, it was fiction, but it inspired real outrage and prompted playwright Sarah Daniels to create Masterpieces, a play we're reviving for Ireland in 2020. Why? Because we want to talk about porn, about violence, about the ways we paint women and the ways we censor them. And to start that conversation, we've gone face to face with the experts. These are their voices.
The jury in this trial had been deliberating for over 3 hours. At that stage, the judge, Patricia Smith, made it known that the jury had reached a unanimous decision on all 6 counts. The defendants were then told by the foreman of the jury that the verdict on all counts involving all the defendants was not guilty.
Consistency had never been a feature of the complainant's evidence long before she entered the witness box. So these acquittals should come as no surprise. Vile commentary expressed on social media, going well beyond fair comment, has polluted the sphere of public discourse and raised real concerns about the integrity of the trial process.
My name is Noeline Blackwell and I'm the Chief Executive of Dublin Rape Crisis Centre.
The Rape Crisis Centre in Dublin has been an invaluable resource for victims of rape for over 40 years, tirelessly advocating for victims facing what many consider to be a hostile justice system. In the wake of #ThisIsNotConsent and a string of high-profile rape cases that saw Ireland's women taking to the streets in protest, we went face-to-face with the DRCC's chief executive to get the facts about sexual violence in our country.
In the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, we run the state's 24-hour helpline, so people can get help any hour of the day or night that they want, any day of the year. That we have the face-to-face therapy for individuals and for groups, and then we will accompany people into the justice system. People who have to go to the sexual assault treatment unit after rape or sexual assault. It's a tough thing to do. We go and give them psychological support there, or if they're reporting into the Gardaí or going to court, you can never say there's a right time to disclose that abuse. People have to say it when they're ready, and we want to be there to catch it when it's ready. Consent is what is the difference between legal and good sexual activity and harmful and wrong sexual activity. So sexual activity is harmful where there is no consent. Consent then has to be free and voluntary. That can be hard to work out. It's very easy to understand where there is no consent, where somebody is so asleep, so drunk that they cannot consent, where they've consumed so many drugs they cannot consent, where they're being forced. That's very easy to understand. It's very easy to understand there is consent where 2 people are in active agreement in the sexual activity, or more indeed. But it's the bit in between that we have to keep working to establish. That consent is something which is ongoing and active and has to be checked by all parties to the sexual activity throughout that activity. And when one party withdraws their consent, that is the end of the consensual activity. 50 years ago, in the 1970s, in an Irish court, a judge explained to a jury that a wife was a chattel, a thing, just like a cow or a thoroughbred horse. Now the judge, that sounds awful, but the judge was actually only saying what the law was at the time. It was not until 1990 that we had an offence of marital rape. Before that, if a woman said, I was raped and it was my husband who did it, he had a full defence and say, well, she's my wife, I can do that. We did not have a conviction for marital rape until the 21st century, until 2002 or thereabouts. So we are having to rethink intimate relationships and attitudes of entitlement to sex within those relationships. And that is why, too, when I will sometimes be asked, in fact, quite often I'll be asked, What, are you saying I have to have a contract every time I want to have sex with my wife? And I say, well, a contract is no use to you because you make that before you start the activity. But each single time, you and your wife, you and your intimate partner have to have full agreement.
Marital rape, the rape of one partner by another within a marriage, was only made criminal in Ireland in 1990 and remains exceptionally difficult to prove, with just 5 convictions recorded since then.
The rates of reporting are extraordinarily low in relation to sexual offences, but not surprisingly low. Because, for one thing, when you think about it, if you are reporting somebody you know, then there is that whole reality that you are going to upset people within your own social circle and probably within your own family for doing it. In those cases, somebody has to go in and the Gardaí have to investigate in great detail something that is so intimate that normally somebody wouldn't be talking about it with anybody else, let alone with somebody they don't recognise or know. The accused does have legal support, expert legal support, telling their story to the jury, and very often the whole case is going to stand or fall on which the jury believes, and one is very well represented and the other is not represented at all. As a result, we find and we hear from people we're in contact with that very often someone will come through a court process, no matter what the outcome, and say the trial, the justice system was harder, more traumatic, more difficult, and more damaging than the rape or other sexual assault that preceded it. Juries are not being well equipped to deal with these cases. Juries come in from the street or wherever they come in from with their own ideas about whether a girl is looking for sex if she's wearing too short a skirt or has too high heels or goes home with a boy, or whether two men going to a gay nightclub, whether one of them must be looking for sex. So they have all their own preconceptions that they are not told to how to deal with those preconceptions, which are often called rape myths. And the other thing they don't know is how to recognise how trauma impacts people. So some people will cry, but some people will be stony-faced. Some people will run, but some people will not be able to move. 2 years ago, in April 2018, Minister Charlie Flanagan said there would be a review of how victims are treated in the justice system and that it could not continue. That review has been delayed and delayed and delayed and is so necessary.
Statistical data on unresolved cases can be challenging to find and slow to be released. But we do know that as recently as 2015, 1,210 sexual assault cases received by the Central Criminal Court were not resolved in court. Noeline Blackwell argues that many such cases are ultimately dropped by complainants for whom the lengthy process and emotional trauma of a trial is simply too difficult.
My big piece of advice is, whatever it is you're seeing on porn, it's not real, it's not right, and you need to properly inform yourselves. And I know you probably don't want to raise this with anybody other than your mates, but your mates are only looking at porn for the most part as well, and it is important that you seek, and you are entitled to get decent advice about what a body looks like, how people behave. In the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, we have literally developed a new module on pornography, because while we don't teach children and young people directly, we deal with our guidance counsellors, people in youth work settings and in schools, and they're all crying out for resources to help address the scourge that is pornography. We have a problem for young people in that some of them are receiving education on this, and so that even when we developed our module on pornography, we have schools that will take it and we will have schools who won't. I say that it is actually a violation of the rights of a child not to get the level of education that they need in order to grow emotionally. Why are we doing that to some of our young people today?
A 2018 survey of almost 2,000 third-level students revealed that over half of male respondents had first accessed pornography at an age younger than 13.
I can't tell you how often I get into a taxi, say I'm going to the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, and they say, come here, don't a lot of people falsely accuse men of rape? And it does. So the answer to that is, it happens, but it doesn't often happen. think about what you're saying. You're saying that some woman is to go into a police station and go through the awkward and very difficult justice system we have simply to make a false accusation. Most people have better things to do with their lives. The studies are all come from different corners of question, so it's very hard to say, but if it is 0.2%, that is probably the height of it. And it is quite regularly caught and prosecuted early in an investigation as well. That's what people ask me about in taxis. They very rarely ask me about, isn't it true that most women are afraid to report rape when it happens because they are afraid that the other person will say it didn't happen and they'll be called a liar. And this is indeed the situation that women have been in for a very, very long time.
A 2009 study tracking false allegations of rape across Europe found trends showing a range of between 4 and 9% of rape allegations are considered false. Even this very low figure must be considered in context. Data gathered included cases determined to have insufficient evidence to secure conviction.
We are hearing of behaviour that is abusive, really. So it could be, for instance, somebody says, I was choked, and apart from that, the sex was good. Well, the choking bit wasn't, and that was abusive of somebody else. Somebody else says, they took off the condom during sex, and I hadn't agreed to that, and but otherwise the sex was good. So at that stage as well, you have to recognise that in the sexual activity, there was non-consensual behaviour. And where it was non-consensual, it was harmful, it was wrong. And that has to be called out. Just because it's new, it's trendy, you've seen it in some porn or you've seen it in a film, does not make it right. It is not respectful, it is not right, and therefore it has to be called. As we move forward, as more and more of us of all gender recognise that to be correct, sexual activity must be consensual and that consent must be free and voluntary. This does force everyone to rethink sexual activity. And because we come from hundreds, if not thousands of years of men being told it was their entitlement to have sex with their property, the woman, then the journey for men as to how to engage in a new equal relationship can be very difficult. All that's really needed is that understanding there is no entitlement for one person to have sex with another without their consent, no matter what their relationship. But in every single case, consent can be communicated, and often is communicated. And where it isn't, just stop. Don't be a messer. Don't let your friends mess in that way either. Call out your friends if they are behaving in behaviour that you know is wrong and bullying in the sexual activity area. Call them out. Stop it. Just stop it. If you're going to do harm, if you're going to not recognise that all sexual activity must be consensual, if you're not going to go down that route, then you risk not only committing a criminal offence, but harming somebody else for the rest of their lives, and that could harm you for the rest of yours as well.
We want you to be a part of this conversation. Catch Masterpieces at Dublin's Smock Alley Theatre from March 2nd to 7th at 7:30pm nightly, with a matinee performance on the 7th of March at 2pm. Join some of our face-to-face interviewees for a post-show discussion on the 6th or 7th of March and make your voice heard.